We're going to have Sue England, who's going to talk about non-state legal orders based on religious belief systems, their danger to the national and international rights of women, and Jenny Watson, who's going to talk about building lesbian spaces in the UK. We're also aiming to have, if we have time, we're going to replay the video by Susan Hawthorne of Spin Effects Press, which is a fascinating talk. It's the politics of disability and overcoming shame. And it's just amazing that it's so from an Australian webinar, but we'll play that if we turn out we have time. And we've got Kerri Bruss doing a report from the United States. WDI has volunteer activists, including country contacts from every continent. We have many donors, and we're so grateful to the donors. We don't have any large donors, but we have a lot of small donors, and it keeps us going. We have very little money, but we're managing to keep going and do various actions. The conference that WDI are organising is in Euston, London, so just North London. It's very good connections. It's going to be about the spread of gender identity politics, the global spread of it. We're really trying to focus on, I mean, as with the declaration, we're trying to look at the international aspects and have a wide range of speakers and participants from all over the world. But it's in London, so we'll probably have quite a few Brits there. We explain what the declaration is. So speakers we've got so far are Sheila Jeffries. She's going to talk about the difficulty of talking about sex. And on one of the programs, we've got a previous talk, but this is what she's going to be talking about. Then we've got Emma Byrne, Children of Transitioners, Tinsel Angel, Trans Widows, Alison Jenner, Gender Identity in Liberal Parties. And she's been focusing on Europe. And I saw her the other day, and she says that she's done loads of research, so we'll get a really good new, well, all of this is going to be new. Everybody's creating new talks for this. Linda Blade is coming in on Zoom. She's going to talk about the situation with women's sports globally. It was just after the Olympics, so it will be very interesting. And Linda's very engaged and in the loop for all of international sport. Anna Zobnina will talk about processes and trends in relation to gender identity and prostitution in the UN system, the EU and Council of Europe. Now, she's just probably the best expert on this, so it'll be amazing to have her there. I'm going to talk about gender identity ideology as a political attack on radical feminism. So the fact that it actually doesn't just harm individuals or groups of people, but it affects our political movement. Bernadette O'Malley on the UK work on the repeal of the Gender Recognition Act, and also how we can repeal self-ID laws globally. Now, that's going to be different in different countries, but we're going to see if we can share some info on it. Amparo Domingo, EU and ILGA's role. So that will be really good. Amparo is a massively big expert on this, and also pretty much always has very, very amusing talks. So that will be great. Sally Wainwright, looking at grassroots women watching the global spread. She'll talk about probably the book and stuff to do with the book, Gender Wrongs Women's Rights. Lauren Levy, Lesbian Bill of Rights International, global impact on lesbians. Gunda Schumann from Germany, Lawrence from USA, Gunda from Germany, global impact. Sharon Byrne from Wolf, United Nations role in global spread. I mean, this is just going to be so interesting. It's amazing. So Sharon has been going to the UN. That sort of has got ECOSOC status via some of her contacts, so is very much an insider on the UN process, so that would be very useful for everybody to hear from her. Lorraine Nolan, who's WDI USA Black Women's Caucus and also on the board of WDI USA, will talk about both of those different things. Gabrielle Gallagher from Ireland, gender identity politics possibly imploding. Maureen O'Hara, developments on Turf Island. Alexandra Asteritti, now her book is coming out. She's another huge expert on this issue. The book's going to be called A Certain Inconvenience, The Genealogy of Gender Identity in International Law. And she's coming to the conference, which is going to be, she does the blog or the Substack Gender Dissident. The book looks amazing, and we're going to have copies. If really think we will have copies on sale at the conference. Julia Long, Getting Away with It, Transgenderism as Mitigation in the Criminal Justice System. Kate Barker from LGBT Alliance, the international work of LGBT Alliance. Maya Forstater, Sex Matters, Using Law to Defend Women's Rights. Now, they've been doing amazing work on loads of legal cases, and we know that the Sex Matters have done lots of different very impactful things, and so we'll be able to hear from Maya, and that will be very useful internationally. We're going to video everything and record pretty much everything. There's a couple of things people don't want us to record, but pretty much everything. We'll have a live Radical Feminist Perspectives with Julia, Sheila, me, Dorothea Annison, Kate Newey, How Radical Feminism Was Expelled from Academia. Tonya Jeevjon is going to do WDI Norway. Oh, sorry, she's going to do Fetishism in Norwegian Politics and the role this has played in the erosion of women's rights. And Leisha de Bruin, the Countess from Ireland, we don't know the name of her talk yet, but she's going to do a talk. So it's going to be amazing. Okay, so we are now going to go to our first speaker, who is Sue England. And Sue is a human rights lawyer living and working in Germany. She does sessions on human rights for women, particularly for non-lawyers.
So it sounds a bit formal. Non-state legal orders based on religious belief systems, their danger to the national and international rights of women. Well, this is actually specifically a topic about religions and cults seeking control over women, but by pretending to be legal organizations and impose what they are calling legal rules on women. And it's not new, but it's come up again big time in the UK recently. So this is what inspired us to get me to do this talk today. And some people may have seen this if they're watching the British press. This is actually The Guardian. And it's written by a very famous female feminist in the UK. And it's headed, "The world is getting its first Sikh court in London. That is a threat to women's rights," by Pragna Patel, who some of us may know. And I've actually given you the link to that because it's a very interesting article about this whole issue, but based around this new Sikh court. Okay, so, and I'm quoting her here: "With the UK judicial system cut to breaking point, conservative religious forces are moving into a space vacated by the state." And I certainly agree with that. But obviously, there are other religions and cults which have been doing the same thing. I'm going to focus mainly on the UK just because I know this better. But it's related to the other issues in a sense, because I always remember Joe first introducing me to this idea that it's a new cult of misogynist men in dresses, is the trans cult that we're talking about. But of course, we all are well exposed to and know all about the influence of other cults of men in dresses. In other words, religious organizations and cults. So in the UK, we have I always get it the wrong way around. We have Beth Dins, which call themselves Jewish courts. We have Muslim courts, increasingly Hindu courts, and now this Sikh court. And these things are also happening in other countries. But as I repeat, I'm going to focus on what I know about the UK. So this is very similar in other ways because these are organizations taking words and misusing them and gaining power and control by misusing them. So although this is written by Pragna Patel, and she has to get it out to the wider audience, what's the word that's wrong in the top line of that? Court. It isn't a court. It's something which certain sectors within the Sikh religion have decided to call a court and presenting it to us as a court. It's not. So I will repeat what Pragna Patel also says in this, because this I agree with. When many minority women, because she's in an organisation which has worked particularly with minority women for a long time in the UK, seek to escape abuse, they're subject to pressure and coercion to stay silent and tolerate the abuse for the sake of keeping their family unit intact. Their profoundly unequal status, coupled with an unequal power distribution over knowledge of legal rights, here she does mean legal rights, real legal rights, will make it even more difficult to reject attempts at mediation. Most people have heard of that word. Well, it is a word that has come in from the legal sphere, or to complain when decisions are made against their interests. Well, what sort of decisions? Who by? Are these legal decisions? No, they're not with these organisations. The formal UK legal system, in other words, the real legal system, allows women to obtain legal advice and representation in compliance with the rule of law and principles of fairness. This is a stark contrast to religious courts. And again, she's using that word to try and, make people understand what is being said. But of course, it's not true. They are not courts. So we have to bear in mind here, and this applies to all these organizations, wherever they are being set up, there is no legal meaning in the word religious marriage. There's no such thing in law. Certainly not in the UK, but in many other countries as well. It doesn't exist. It doesn't have any legal form at all. Marriage is marriage, and it's always governed by the state. Even though many aspects of it will come in your society from the predominant religions in your society, especially going back, it is governed and controlled by the state. The rules are made through a democratic process, and the only way that you can enforce them and deal with them and protect yourself is by going to the courts of the land. So as soon as somebody uses this phrase for you, religious marriage, they're telling you something complete. They may not realize, but they're telling you something completely different. It's not law we're talking about then. It is people within a certain community think there is something called religious marriage, and they may have rituals and celebrations around it, but it has no legal meaning whatsoever. You have to be married according to the rule of the law of the land, which is completely secular, and we've decided on the rules and they apply to everyone. And the place where you have to go is to a state authorized body. And then if you want a divorce, for example, or you want legal issues dealt with, you need to look at the law and you need to go to a state court, maybe, unfortunately, to be dealing with divorce. Exactly the same thing, therefore, is applying, as I've started to say, religious court or tribunal. Court and tribunal are in English just two words for the same thing, but a court or a tribunal is provided by the state and runs according to state laws. And also, very importantly, in all the human rights legislation, they set up rules that everybody should be treated fairly in courts, for example. But then they're talking about the courts of the land, which we've all set up and pay for as well as deciding the rules. Ditto, some of these organizations are setting up councils. They're not going and using the word court or tribunal, but what they're actually setting up are things that are supposed to actually control people who come to them, like a court with decision makers who apply rules and are supposed to learn, evidence and lay down decisions that everybody should then follow. It has no legal meaning whatsoever. So I disagree with my own title for any of those who can think back to that. Non-state, and now I've put marks around it, legal order. It's not a legal order. So it's not, there isn't even, you can't actually say non-state legal order. It isn't legal. It isn't an order. It doesn't have any bite. This will be, in this particular set of circumstances, a set of religious dogmas imposed by the powerful in a certain community. And obviously, there can be different ones. And we're focusing today on religions or cults. Marriage, this word marriage, if they're using it, it's the one and only. In the UK, it's a civil law issue. You're married or not married. We do distinguish clearly between the single state and the married state. And there are other variations now, of course. You are somebody who has been married, but are effectively single again because you have become divorced. You can only use the word marriage correctly in terms of what our state lays down as a civil status and a legal state, the one of being married. And this is particularly for, say, people who come from a Christian heritage, and particularly in the UK. What has become completely obfuscated is that marriage in the UK has always been, and going back hundreds and hundreds of years, a civil contract. It's like, I'm sorry to say, but buying a car. I want to enter into contractual relations with somebody over something, and we agree a contract. And of course, in the old days, and even now, you can do that verbally. It doesn't have to be in writing, but the two of you have to come to agreement about a certain set of facts. So, as has become completely obfuscated, in fact, if you get married in the UK, even if you go to church, or even if in some occasions you go to a mosque, come on to that later, you are entering into a civil contract, and you always have done. And basically, the religious got involved with it because, of course, it was in the culture, but also because remember, when people couldn't read and write, and when the government wanted to sort of set up a structure of control throughout the society, and when there were more people moving around, the government wanted marriages correctly registered with them so they knew who was married and who was not, and who were entering into these contracts. It was very convenient to ask our Church of England to do it. Say in England, they had people who could read and write. They could afford the paper and the ink, although they grumbled about it immensely. They had stone buildings, they could keep these records. So, to caricature a bit, they only got involved as administrators for the state. And the state said there are all these people out there in the countryside and other places doing contracts between themselves, a man and a woman, to get married. It can be oral, they can do it, most people did do it orally, their pet family may or not know, etc. But they've entered into a marriage contract and it's binding, and we want it recorded. And that's where all this came from. But you are still getting into a legal contract, but a civil contract. And the rules about its formation of this contract came more and more under sort of government control, but drawing on the practices of the country. Its continuance and its end, once divorce is allowed, for example, is all set down in our democratically made legislation. And the process for you getting married or divorced is all set down in our democratically made legislation. And the courts and the registrars and things that deal with this are all controlled by our democratic laws. So, just to bring us on to this situation that most of us, certainly in the UK, will be very familiar with, you go and you're getting married or somebody is getting married. It can be in a registry office. Some case it can be in mosque, it can be in a hotel. There are different forms of celebrants. You can do the whole wiggy wiggy thing with a meringue dress and cakes and hundreds of guests, whatever, or you can do it much more simply, or you can uh, okay, yeah, you can do it much more simply. You can have it embodied in a religious ceremony or not. If you go to the registry office, there is no form of religious ceremony. So here are the contracting words for a marriage, which are brought from British law going back hundreds of years for a civil contract of marriage. And they were put in what we actually call the Marriage Acts, and they continue. So your registrar or your vicar or anyone has to, you've got two choices. I call upon these persons here present to witness that this is what usually the man first has to say, full legal name, to take the, nice old fashioned language, full name, um, to be my lawful wedded husband, and the other part, and you are contracting with that person. And the more modern formulation is simply, I, whoever, take you to be my wedded wife and husband. Is the registrar officially marrying you? No, the two people do. Is the priest officially marrying you? No, they are witnessing a civil contract. And what was important, the more and more people in society, that the society knows what's going on and knows that these contracts are made. To make a marriage, it's all controlled by our law, always has been. Two people must follow UK law. Obviously, now we can have marriage between people of the same sex. It must be registered with the Registrar of Marriages. The registrar will check that everything is legal, and that's why you have to go down along to the registry office and fill in on the forms and produce papers and get the authorization, and then either organise to be married at the registry office or in another place. The people who do it, if you're not in the registry office, have been legally authorized to do it by the state, even if they're performing religious ceremonies. They do the state's job within a religious ceremony, but the state's job has to be done. And so, for example, I mean, I've come across this because I knew one or two registrars for a while and talked to them. And the reality is that, say, in church marriages in Britain, sometimes the couple have gone to the registry office and filled in all the appropriate forms, and then they have to liaise with in this case, Church of England vicar, and he has to do it all properly and then record it, and it all has to be sent back. And so they've done the whole thing, and something went wrong with the rules. The bans weren't given 6 weeks, or somebody forgot to sign something, or somebody didn't speak the right words. You're not married. So registrars, when they discover this a bit later, when the papers go in a few days later to the registry, have to sort of quietly contact the people involved and say, I'm totally sorry about this, but you're not married. You have had the full meringue thing and 120 guests at St. Botolph's, but unfortunately, you're not actually married. But we will fix it so you can get married on the quiet in the registry office as soon as possible. It will have to be another 6 weeks, so they'll have to have this 6 week delay again. And then we'll get you married. And then it's up to you whether you tell all your friends and family about this. But your marriage certificate will tell they all think you got married in June. Well, you got married in late August. And that's the date on all the papers for all legal purposes. Okay. And it's also relevant to the fact that some other religions, some of the people in those religions have decided to take part in this as well. And they follow the rules. So you can get married in some mosques. Other mosques don't have anything to do with formal legal marriage. They may well be having ceremonies, but they're not plugged into the civil law, the national system. So you have to go and do the process through the registry office as well. Okay. So I think I've persuaded people, I hope, that the rules are secular, not religious. Okay? So there's no marriage made if the rules are not followed exactly. And we can understand where we're sort of going a bit as well with this idea of now saying there are religious courts, tribunals, councils who can help you, with problems within your marriage, and in fact also help you if this relationship is breaking down. If you've only had a religious ceremony, you're not married, and you never will be married, even if you go along sort of telling everyone you're married and doing things that sort of married people do. You're not married at all. You have to follow the marriage acts exactly. No religious ceremony is relevant. But of course, particularly those people who've only had a religious ceremony and don't seem to understand that they're not married, they are then more likely to fall into this sort of trap of dealing with the rest of it through religious organizations who sort of say they're courts. Well, the religion wasn't able to marry you, and they're certainly not able to deal with problems in your relationship and then divorce you. If you're not married, you can't be divorced. And sort of to bring it up a little bit more to date, the rule of civil partnerships are similar. And I want to add at this stage that there's a big push in this direction, as it were, to go more and more in this direction, even in the UK. I saw there was a TV program done by Hindus. I can't possibly find the reference, but it was a British TV program, and they were pushing the case that Hindus ought to be able to have Hindu ceremonies. But also, then this was going to be leading on to the idea that then that marriage would be governed by Hindu laws, and any divorce would be covered by Hindu laws. So this is part of a package. And also, a little bit amusingly, in fact, when there were changes in Poland and the Catholic Church became very powerful in Poland about 20 years ago, it was actually proposed that they would change the rules in Poland and say that if you got married in a Catholic church in Poland, you couldn't get divorced. This is the same trend, okay? It didn't come into effect. And of course, it was a bit of an old goal because people rapidly realized who were pushing this, well, what people will do in Poland, because they do have a couple of generations of living under the sort of communist regime system, it's marriage being completely secular, they won't get married in Catholic churches. So that would be a bit of a known goal, and they didn't go further with it. But this is what's behind it very much, pushing people from certain communities into believing that religious ceremonies are legal, pushing them into thinking that these religious courts, tribunals are legal, and then the whole governance of your marriage will be under whatever rules this religious group pushes on you, and particularly what would then happen to you if you get divorced. But fortunately, nothing has gone in that direction in the UK, and I can't speak for many other countries, but that's sort of something to keep your eye on. Okay? So, just to be clear, your civil status changes if you get married. It has to be marriage. No confounding words, marriage. You are married. And then a mother or a father of a child, for example, who is married can sorry, let's skip the children bit. First of all, you're married and you have different legal rights supplied by the whole society through law, and you can also obviously get divorced under those rules, and both parties have a lot of different rights to try and make this thing as painless as possible. If you're not married, even though you're living as married, a mother or a father of a child, particularly if they're responsible for the child, can claim money or property for a child from the other person in this relationship, the father or the mother of this child, but not for themselves in most circumstances. If you live together, you're treated as individuals, you retain your own property, but you don't have all the powers given by the courts to adjust things if you split up. Because you're splitting up as two single individuals. You've never entered into a marriage, a civil contract marriage. Oh, well, this was just, I won't go into this, I think, because I've covered some of it. But you see, um, some religious cultures can't follow these essential rules of marriage. And you'll find they're much the same in most countries where, the state wants to know what's going on and keep proper records. You have to have marriages in a public place. Many mosques don't let the public in, for example. I'm not picking on different religions. Don't let people in, or they don't let women in. 6 weeks public notice must be given in an accepted public place. This is called the bans. The parties must be 18 years old, single, prove they're divorced. The registrar checks all this out to ensure that you are able to get married. Again, checking out the things about people being related closely. I won't go into the technical details. And the marriage must be completely voluntary on both sides. And it is, in fact, the registrar's job or somebody that's been deputed, like the local vicar or priest, to be honest and open about this and refuse to go ahead if it appears that there is coercion. And of course, it's taking place in a public place where literally anyone can walk in. You can't be stopped, and you can see what's going on. So, as you can see, some mosques and other organisations, for example, in the UK, have decided to sort of this is fine, but others, it would be completely impossible anyway because they can't comply with these arrangements. Some hotels who wanted to arrange to have the marriage trade fell into difficulty because they then said, well, this place has to be perfectly open and public for anybody to wander across your grounds during this process. And they said, oh, we don't want that. No, we don't. We're a more private hotel than that. Okay. Somebody's just asked about bans, but it's just a very old form that we use for this 6 weeks notice. It has to go up in a public place. X wants to marry Y on Tuesday, the 19th of January in St. Botolph's or in a local hotel. This is public notice of this fact. So if you're in fact married to one of those, or now is your time to interfere. Okay, it's to keep the system open and public. Okay, so what's all? I think I'm winding to an end. Okay, what follows from all this? If you're not married, you don't have the protections of marriage. You don't have the rights given by a court on divorce. You're in a very dangerous and vulnerable position, especially if you have no or not much property, income, or if you have children. But also, all this applies as well if you are married legally in the UK, but you are pressurized or you think you must go to one of these organizations. It'll normally be your own religion or your own cultural religion, and you think that they can do the things which a state court can do for you. Make legal separation arrangements, make a divorce, sort out your property, sort out the income, pensions, the arrangements for the children. They can't, and it's extremely dangerous. And of course, the people who are in most danger, just as in ordinary civil marriage, to be honest, are women because they tend to have more of the responsibility for the children. They are normally in a less financially satisfactory situation, and also they're also more likely to have been subject to violence or harassment in some way. So therefore, going into this system set up by whoever, a group of people within a certain culture who set themselves up and appoint them as then, another word, judges. Excuse me, how are you a judge? And what set of rules are you going to apply? This article by Pragna Patel points out, I didn't know, that in fact the Sikh religion doesn't actually have a set of rules within itself for marriage. So they're not even applying something like that. They're going to make up a set of rules that suit the people who have set up these courts. And usually, certainly in the past, they have always asked for some money, for some fees to come to them for doing this process. So I am just mainly repeating what I'm doing here. We won't go through the top one again or two. So complications. That's the third sentence. Mediation. Mediation is something that has come in from other places. It was, in fact, used by business people. It's become increasingly used as a technique to try and help parties to a marriage or a family discuss things together. It's only occasionally useful because, particularly if there's a huge imbalance in power between the parties or where there is violence, the rules of mediation are supposed to be that the mediator cannot get involved. You have to say from the beginning, I can't mediate between people who are the balance of power between them is completely different. Or in fact, there's threats and violence involved here. You can't mediate. The person who's already been subject to violence or knows then there may be further violence cannot sort of protect themselves. And this mediation is not legally binding. Then they're using the words arbitration. There is something called arbitration. It's more formal. But again, it was set up for commercial disputes. It was like set up a process whereby you didn't go to a full court, but you went into arbitration. There is an arbitration act and there are rules about it that are supposed to make it, without being too expensive, mimic a court's decision on something, but give more room for manoeuvre for the parties to negotiate, and then say, if we've done this process, we agree that we will abide by the rule of the arbitrator. This is not suitable for marriage or family issues, and particularly, no arbitration court should get involved in the criminal law. And obviously, if we're talking about there being violence or threats of violence or anything like that, coercive control, anything like that, there's no power here for these non-state agents to be involved. They'd be interfering in the job of the state over criminal law. Please don't call them courts or tribunals. I know that this is going to be difficult because one automatically grabs for the nearest word. Please don't. I mean, be very careful about the word council and make sure that you're not giving the impression that you think a council is a sort of court or tribunal. We've got to quite clearly say these are organizations set up pretending to be courts or tribunals. They've got undemocratic, self-appointed members, and there are a lot of breaches of human rights involved in this. So in the UK, we all know the Equality Act 2010. Well, an arrangement like this is breached in non-discrimination against people, male, female, religious or not religious, and it also includes that you must be applying equality of opportunity between different types of people. It breaches CEDAW, the UN Convention on the Elimination of Discrimination Against Women, because it actually asks states, and most states in the world are part of it, that you're supposed to be acting to eliminate discrimination against women in all matters, including marriage and family relations. So that is focused on your own courts, your own legal courts and tribunals, your own police, your social services or whatever, but it certainly doesn't encompass allowing the state to allow these sort of things to happen. And it's appalling that, for example, in the UK, women's organisations have now been complaining about this for 30, 40 years, and the government's not taking notice. For those who've looked into the Istanbul Convention, trying to eradicate violence against women in most European countries, well, the countries have agreed that they don't want to encourage harmful attitudes prejudices, gender stereotypes, and gender-based traditions that put women down and treat them as inferior. We're talking about religions and cults, enough said. The European Convention on Human Rights. This is breaking the rules about discrimination based on sex or indeed religion, but in that sense, religion or non-religion or different religions, and also the fact that you have a right to trial, a right to a fair trial, and the rules are very detailed in civil and criminal proceedings. It breaks the Children Act in the UK, 1989, and the UN Convention on the Rights of the Child as well, which the UK is in. Probably all countries are in, except the US, of course, because they have the rule that the best interests of the child should always be paramount when any state organization is involved in that child. And that certainly covers, the courts and the tribunals, etc., and any form of legal proceeding that covers children.
I'm going to just play the news report from Kerri. So that is the news report from the USA.
Last week, I mentioned the launch of the Our Bodies, Our Sports Coalition's Take Back Title IX bus tour, which plans to travel across America throughout the month of June to call attention to the Biden administration's new Title IX regulations and the devastating impact they will have on women and girls' athletic opportunity, privacy, and safety. After the launch in Scranton, the tour held a press conference on the 31st at the Women's Open in Lancaster, Pennsylvania, to urge the USGA and LPGA to keep women's golf female, and continues with a stop in Oklahoma City, Oklahoma on June 6th. Kara represented WDI USA at the first two events and plans to attend others. Her speech in Lancaster, which cites Article 7 of the Declaration, is now widely accessible across our social media accounts. On the 30th, WDI USA launched a series of lesbian-themed Twitter ads that will run throughout Pride Month with the goal of increasing US signatories to the Declaration. The concept for the ads, namely that lesbians don't have or like penises, was conceived of by board member Catherine Kinney, who also created the graphics used in the ads, while Elizabeth Chasek, our chief of staff, executed them on the platform. Each graphic links to the campaign's landing page on our website that provides additional relevant information, as well as a direct link to sign the declaration. On average, we add 1 to 2 new signatures per day, but I'm pleased to report that by the third day of the campaign, we'd already seen a spike of 13 new signatures. We're hoping that momentum continues. Next, New Hampshire's Fairness in Women's Sports Act, which would keep sports single-sex in grades 5 through 12, has been passed by both of the state's legislative houses and now awaits the governor's signature. Once signed, New Hampshire will become the 25th state to ban male participation in female sports at the secondary level, collegiate level, or both. This comes after trans-identified male athlete Maëlle Jacques has accumulated multiple titles in girls' high school track in the state. Also awaiting a decision by the governor is HB 619, which bans gender reassignment surgery for minors. On Friday, Kara authored a piece published in the Washington Examiner and subsequently on her Substack titled, "At Least Ted Cruz Understands Men Don't Belong in Women's Prisons." She opens the piece with the following: "If you had told me when I graduated law school that I would one day use my Ivy League law degree to tell the federal judiciary that women don't have penises, I wouldn't have believed you." It goes on to mention a nomination hearing exchange between far-right Republican Senator Ted Cruz and Judge Sarah Netburn, during which he questioned why she had permitted a fully intact male with a woman identity, previously convicted of 2 counts of child rape and 1 count of distributing child pornography while on parole to be transferred to a federal women's prison, referring to it as insanity. Additionally, on the same day the article was published, Cruz used his X account to both quote and promote the article and to praise Kara for providing much needed common sense on this issue, which as of today has had over 360,000 views. As radical feminists, we never thought we would agree with Senator Cruz on anything, but here we are. And last but not least, our Lesbian Caucus recently asked signatories to submit personal accounts about an adventure they had in a lesbian bar as a means of celebrating and preserving lesbian history. The caucus has since compiled the best of the received submissions into a new blog post titled Lesbian Bar Stories, a Pride Gift. We hope you enjoy these 10 firsthand accounts of lesbian history presented anonymously to support truth-telling and unedited. Happy reading and happy lesbian pride to all.
Thank you so much, Jenny. So Jenny's Jenny Watson from the UK. After backlash from a men-free policy at her lesbian events, Jenny created Elle Community, a platform for lesbian and bisexual women. The app launches next month as the world's first lesbian exclusive dating and social app, with a dedicated venue to follow later this year.
I'll start with a bit of background about myself. So one time someone described me as an accidental activist because the timeline was started doing events and so I hadn't peaked and they were inclusive events. So I thought we're all in this fight together, right? So it was an LGBT group and then I peaked at Get the L Out. And that was it was a really profound experience for me, very emotional experience. And I remember doing Google searches, trying to find a community, and I couldn't find anything. And I realize now that it's because Google was censored, right? And if I'd went on Twitter, I would have found that community. So the first thing is, Get the L Out at their action. They showed me that someone who had no idea that there was an alternative. And fundamentally, that's what we want to do, because I feel like many, particularly young women, they don't realize that there is an alternative, and that's our mission. So when I couldn't find anything on Google, I just gave up, thinking there's nothing. I think I found one organization. I found Women's Place UK, and the events weren't frequent. I think I found one and it was months away. So I just gave up. And I just had to accept it. And so I went back to my events and I didn't want to get them cancelled. So I just had to accept what was going on. Although I moved away from the LGBT and I made splinter groups, so lesbian splinter groups. But the problem was, over the years, it just got worse and worse. And then it got to a point where I thought, I can't take it anymore. And that was last year. And so we got cancelled. The bar manager, they joined a WhatsApp group called London Against Transphobia, to get all my events cancelled. And keep in mind, we'd had so many beautiful outcomes from doing, 7, 8 years of events. We had 2 weddings, and we also had platonic parenting, which I think is quite nice because of all the surrogacy things going on at the moment. So it's 2 gay men, lesbian couple, and I thought that was really beautiful. And then, yeah, it was all taken away from us overnight. And then I got the LGBT Alliance involved, who helped me. We were on cancelled. Victory, I thought. But no, because the story had spread so wide, like every time we would run an event, there were activists there, and they, as you know, they don't behave very well. They intimidated women. We used to have, we had a good quantity of people turning up to the events, and after that, women were scared. And so we had to self-cancel in the end. So we had this victory, and it was a victory from the UK's largest pub chain, Stonegate. So it was a real victory, but it didn't last long because the activists decided, we're not going to have this. So like so many years of positive community building, as I said, weddings, platonic parenting, it was all overshadowed by abuse. So just to give you a bit of context, right? In the UK, we don't have any dedicated spaces that exclude men from lesbian spaces. So there's only 2 venues in the UK, and they both welcome trans-identified males with open arms. The one in London, I won't name it, but they have a sign inside and it says turf-free zone. So effectively, we have no lesbian venues in the UK. And I find that completely insane, given the kind of historical context. And I know a lot of people say the Gateways Club was a bit of a sleazy place. Even still, it was a safe space in a place, in a time when homosexuality and same-sex attracted relationships weren't accepted. And we find ourselves in that very same period. And so these spaces are so, so important. Sort of back to what I was saying about when I peaked at Get the L Out London Pride, I had no idea there was an alternative. And so in terms of the need and the importance of what we want to show younger lesbians, who often they don't have an idea, like they've never experienced the comfort and the solidarity of being in women-only environments because they're like pressurized by this queer narrative. And then, of course, older lesbians, they recall the importance and the safety of such spaces. So I think these dedicated spaces are needed to show young lesbians there's an alternative, and they don't need to be coerced into these relationships with men or spaces with men who identify as lesbians. Abusive men, I would say, right? And then for older women who've seen it all unfold, what I'm going to call it is the lesbian renaissance. So the benefits of lesbian spaces, obviously, we've touched on that. Safety, free from harassment, violence, even just discomfort by men. Because, we've heard it all before, not all men are violent. But even still, all women, or most women, are going to feel highly uncomfortable with men in their single-sex spaces. I would say the next key point is cultural preservation. So we need a space that preserves and celebrates lesbian identity, history, and culture. And then final benefit is just community building. It creates connections and support networks. So there's demand for it, there's need for it, there's benefits, and people aren't doing it. And so rather than like steering away and complaining, well, we're going to give it our very best shot. So we've named it L Community because we wanted it to be a community vibe. So when you think of lesbian bars and lesbian apps, you think of younger women, people who go out to party and dance and get drunk. Although, sometimes, we can appreciate those things. But we want to make it a lot more than that. We want it to be representative of all kinds of women, all ages, all backgrounds. It's not going to be a bar, it's going to be a community. So the first phase of the initiative is the mobile app. The Daily Mail just dropped an article on Sunday. Was it, I mean, that they like to do sensational headlines, and it wasn't, it wasn't probably the best, but, it's exposure, and that's why I'm very much receptive to going on GB News, Talk TV, these kinds of things, because no one else is going to platform us, and we need to get the message out there. So in terms of how L Community is going to work, we talked about the app, fully developed. We've just got a few design things to add. We're actually looking for testers at the moment, because it was live yesterday. So if anyone is curious about how it works and wants to test it out, just send an email and we'd be happy to make that work. So yeah, the app, it uses sex recognition software, and I've put my own face through that, and I got 99.997% female. So it was pretty accurate. And then we also have manual checks. So if the software can't determine that you are female, and that's just the nature of this kind of software, we're going to do well, we already have implemented manual checks. So you will send a video saying L Community verification, today's date, my name, time, that kind of thing, and we'll base it on a few other things. But the technology itself, I have to say, I've tested it on quite a few people. I don't know if I should admit this, but one of our app developers has a younger brother. He's 19, 20, and we got him a wig, put some makeup on, and the software still knew exactly that he was a man, because it's not based on stereotypes. It's based on, what we all know, bone structure, the hairline, and other things as well. So I'm really looking forward to doing the proper launch for that. In terms of the other digital spaces, we've got a already live social networking site, but I should say both of these things are free to sign up for. You don't need to pay a fee. So if you just go onto L Community and hit the members area, you sign a application form, and we'll review that, and then you can join. You can become a member. And then, in terms of the physical spaces, we've been running quite a number of them, but as I said before, the issue is that the media story got quite far, and so activists they've really made it their mission to shut us down. And a lot of women just aren't very comfortable being around that environment. So we're going to create our own space so that we can make our own rules. So the venue, which is going to be the cornerstone of the initiative, and as I said, is going to have a community vibe during the daytime in order to prevent kind of wasted space. Our initial thought was that we could just rent out the space, because of course you've heard of the decline of lesbian bars, right? So we've had to think outside of the box. So the social networking site, the app, external services. So like what we're planning on doing is trips and excursions and things like that. Let's see. And then during the daytime, we're going to have a co-working space, and also exercise studio / mini gym. And then the target opening for that is going to be the end of the year. But this all depends on securing the rest of the capital. But our goal is for the end of the year. I've got a summit to go to next week. It's for female founders. And believe it or not, female founders, they make up only 3% of founders. So yeah, we'll see how that goes. Hopefully we can get a bit of interest. And then it's just really a case of finding a venue. And then the cornerstone is complete. L Community is a space for same-sex attracted women who may not realize yet, or some of them of course do, but particularly young women, they might not yet realize that there's an alternative. And that is exactly like me in 2018, before Get the L Out and their action. I had no idea. And then it was nothing at all, and then everything all at once. We've tried our very best to get these men to leave us alone, but they're not going to. And yeah, if they didn't behave like that, initiatives like Our Community wouldn't be necessary. So yeah, if anyone wants to become a member, membership is free, the app is free, and then hopefully with time we're going to develop a nice community. Final thing I think I've mentioned before is 29th of June, we're going to be running a lesbian march on the day of Pride, because Pride does not represent lesbians. I know that I think it was a year after Get the L Out's action, a group of lesbians tried to get a space in the Pride parade. Of course they didn't, because they recognize lesbians as not males. And the other day I mentioned this to my mother, and I said to her, so Pride in London, they'll refuse your application for a spot in the Pride Parade if you say that lesbians cannot be men. Your application is refused. And my mother looked at me and she gave me this expression, thinking, what on earth is the world coming to? But I think that, in fact, I know that the world agrees with us, you know. It's yeah, it's reached levels of insanity, I think, at this point. So we are going to change something about that. We're going to change things.